began this project by looking for mirrors that I could use for dressers. I found some by looking through my old compacts that I no longer use. I found this square mirror that I thought would work well for the girls' room. I could not pry the mirror from the case. I tried Goo Gone, hoping it would loosen the glue that was holding it in place, but it was so tightly encased the Goo Gone could not get under it. So I thought to use my Dremel tool with a cutting disc to cut the mirror out of the case. I first cut off one end, hoping maybe I could slip a knife under it with the help of the Goo Gone, but that didn't work. Well, now knowing that I can easily cut plastic, I cut off the opposite end. I was trying to be careful not to cut and shatter the mirror. I want to remind you that you should wear safety glasses when using a Dremel tool. You can see pieces of plastic are flying all over the place. I proceeded to cut around all four sides of the mirror. I cut as close to the mirror as I could. The back side of the mirror is not flat. One end is thicker than the other, but I think I can still make it work. I had thought I could use coffee stirring sticks to go around it, but they were not thick enough to hide the thickness of the one end that's thick. So I chose to use popsicle sticks, which worked perfectly. I measured and cut each side. I used masking tape to temporarily hold the strips while I measured and cut out all four sides to go around the perimeter of the mirror. I used my small hacksaw and meter box to cut my wood strips. This little box aids me in cutting straight cuts and 45-degree angle cuts for corners. It's a handy tool for those who do small crafts. After cutting, I lightly sand each end. I cleaned the mirror thinking it might be harder to clean once I have it all framed. Silly me. But I ended up putting my fingers all over in the building process. So don't bother to clean it until you're all done. I am using Gorilla Glue for this whole project. I pour a small amount in a porcelain bowl and use a toothpick to apply the glue. I love using white porcelain bowls for paints or glues because they can be easily washed out afterwards and be reused. When I go yard sailing, I always look for little white bowls such as this. I applied glue on the sides of the mirror and attached the cut popsicle sticks. I used masking tape to hold each one in place. Masking tape is a low-tack tape and great for temporary holds. That's another crafting tool I always keep on hand. Remember, the back side is thicker on one side. I'm making sure that I push the front of the mirror to be level with the front side of the stick so that in the end the mirror will look flat and not at an angle. Once all four sides are in place, I used a long piece of masking tape to go all the way around, holding everything square, and then set it aside a short while to dry. After about 30 minutes, I removed the masking tape. I don't really like seeing the black line around the mirror, so I decided to make a front-facing frame, but this time I cut the corners at an angle so it would look like a picture frame. The miter box helps me to get the perfect angle cut for this. Once all four pieces are cut, I glue them onto the edge of the previous frame that I had put around the perimeter of the mirror. Make sure to put glue on the angled cuts where the two corner pieces come together. I used clamps to hold everything in place and set aside. Now that is a much better finish. Now to deal with the back side. I laid down 3 craft sticks. They just happened to be the perfect width. I just needed to cut off the rounded edges and cut them to fit. Now, since the mirror is so thick, I don't want to make it any thicker. I know that I'm going to glue it to the dresser, and I'm going to have a board on the back side going down the dresser, so I chose to keep the center stick long, allowing me to glue it to the back side of the dresser without adding another layer. I applied glue on the edge where the pieces will be butted up next to each other. I hold them together firmly while the glue sets. Now I can glue the back on, applying glue to the thin edge of the side frame. nobody will know that the back side of the mirror has a thin side and a wide side. It's completely enclosed in the box frame that I built around it. Next, we start on the dresser, which is being built to fit the framed mirror. I started by gluing 3 craft sticks together, butted up against each other. I decided that will work fine for the 2 sides of the dresser, but I ended up adding a 4th stick for the width of the dresser. It just felt like the dresser needed to be wider than it is deep, as most dressers are. Now I have to use my craft knife on my cutting mat to cut the long straight cuts of the wood. Craft sticks are fairly thin, so they're not hard to cut with a craft knife, but it will take several passes before you cut all the way through. Be sure to have a fresh set of new blades. If you do not, you'll have to work a lot harder. The crafting knife does get dull with a lot of crafting. I will cut the sides from these glued pieces. I decided it was a little too thick, so I'll be cutting off about a 1/4 inch to make it more narrow. Make sure you cut at least 3/4 of the way through before you try to bend it like this. If it does not bend easily, cut some more. You don't want to splinter your wood. This is very thin wood. I will find a use for those cut-off strips later. For this dresser, I'm keeping it simple. I will not be making actual pull-out drawers, so I'm gluing 3 drawer fronts cut from the width of craft sticks. My dresser strips run vertical. Adding the drawer fronts horizontally makes the front side much sturdier because I used vertical strips for the fronts and actually all the sides. For the bottom of the dresser, I did a 2-layer base. 3 strips going horizontally and 4 strips vertical. Just for your information, the height of the front and back and sides is 6 millimeters. Observe that I cut the cross strips just a tad bit short from the edge to make room for the side pieces that will be glued flush. I use the cut-off strip to put on the back side or the inside of the back for added strength, since I know I am working with thin strips of wood. I always like to think about the quality of the structure when I'm building, even when working with very thin materials. Even though the wood is thin, I built a solid structure. It's very well built. I want to add some thin strips crosswise to also strengthen the 2 side pieces. I place them closer to the center so they don't run into the strips I put on the inside of the back. When gluing wood, I clamp everything to make sure that I have a tight fit. Here is a look at my workspace and my tools, which is currently on my dining room table. I'm trying to build myself a crafting shed to have a devoted space for crafting. You can help me in that endeavor by dropping me a small donation. You will find links in the video description below the video for that. Also, check out my playlist about my crafting cottage in the woods. Now that our dresser pieces are ready, we can start assembling them. I first glued the two sides to the back, then added the front. Then we set the box onto the base. I did not pre-assemble the top piece because I wanted to make sure that it had a slight overhang, so I waited until I got this far to get the measurements correct. The top will be 3 craft sticks in depth. That's why I cut off the small strip from the 2 side pieces so that I would have an overhang on the front of the dresser. The back will be flush against the back side. I want an overhang on the 2 sides and the front only. I'm also doing a double layer of materials for a sturdy top. I cut and glue pieces going perpendicular on the underside. That means vertical versus horizontal. I want the very top layer to go horizontal because I think that will look best. Again, I clamp the pieces and set aside. Gorilla Glue sets up in about 30 minutes. Sometimes I don't wait quite that long, but I usually have more than one thing happening at a time, so those little breaks from the project allow me to do other things that need to be done. I sand the top, sanding in the direction of the grain of wood. I want to round off the edges on the 2 sides and the front for appearance sake. Test fit. The mirror will sit directly on the top of the dresser. That doesn't look too bad. It's a simple design. My next dresser will be a lot more complicated, so be sure to subscribe to follow along as I create more dollhouse furniture. So now we glue on the top. Remember, the back side needs to be flush against the back so it can stand up against the wall. Center it so that it overhangs evenly on both sides. I felt it needed one more finishing touch. I had thought to add legs, but when I tested it in the dollhouse, I realized no, I don't want the dresser any taller. The height of it is really good. So no legs this time. I'm using coffee stirrers to add a trim around the base to give it a cleaner look on the bottom. This time, when cutting, I stand the stick on its thin edge for my beveled cut. I use the craft knife to finish the cut and then sand it for a smooth finish. With the 2 side pieces, the backs are cut straight to line up with the back of the dresser, but the corner ends are cut on the narrow side. This small trim added the finishing touch that I wanted. It makes the piece look better. Lastly, we can add the mirror. I put glue on the bottom of the mirror and also on the long board that's going to be glued to the back of the dresser. At this point, you can stain the dresser if you like the wood look. I will do that on my next dresser, but since the girls' room had painted white bed frames, I needed to paint the dresser to match. We can't have mismatched furniture now, can we? I grew up in a home with mismatched furniture. My stepmother thought I was ridiculous by wanting things to be coordinated. The day that I praised her for actually putting up curtains, the color went well with the living room wallpaper, she thought I was crazy and ridiculous. I care about how things look, so I do care about such things. To each his own, I guess. I used acrylic paint to paint the dresser with a 1/2-inch flat brush. That brush worked well, doing the whole job. Here's an art tip. You can put your unused paint back into the tube like this. Just tap the tube on the table and gravity will cause it to fall inside. This tip will also save you money because you won't be wasting paint. I finished off the drawer pulls with some metallic gold paint. I picked up a small jar from the model hobby section of the craft store. For this, I used one of my small brushes for detail painting.